The reckoning at the Whitmore dinner. Elelena Whitmore spat on her husband's face at the family dinner table, in front of relatives, business partners, and everyone who mattered. She thought she had finally broken him, stripping David Whitmore of his dignity before the world. What she didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that the quiet man she humiliated owned 90% of the company she ruled as her throne. And the reckoning he was preparing would silence every cruel laugh in that room. The Whitmore dining hall shimmered with wealth. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light over a table long enough to seat 30, polished to a mirror shine. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted duck and imported wine, but this was no dinner, it was theater. In the Whitmore household, a meal was a performance of hierarchy. Every seat, every glance, every raised glass was a statement of power. At the head of the table sat Elelena, wrapped in scarlet silk that flowed like fire. Diamonds glittered at her throat, but her sharp, hungry eyes gleamed brighter. She lifted her glass with a smirk. To success, to power, and to the Whitmore name. The guests echoed the toast, some with genuine admiration, others with forced smiles. None dared to cross her. Beside her sat David Whitmore, calm and composed in a modest navy suit and silver tie. To the untrained eye, he looked like a man diminished by his wife's brilliance, a shadow in her glow. Elelena had spent years crafting that illusion. She often reminded her friends that David was lucky to have married into wealth, lucky she tolerated his silence, lucky she hadn't replaced him already. "You're awfully quiet, David," Elelena said, her voice slicing through the chatter. "Or perhaps you have nothing to say because you've achieved nothing worth saying." Laughter rippled down the table. Evelyn Hartwell, Elelena's mother, leaned in with satisfaction. "He's always been that way, darling. You can't expect fireworks from ashes." David dabbed the corner of his mouth with his napkin. "Sometimes," he said softly, "a man speaks loudest when he says nothing at all." For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then Elelena laughed, sharp and cruel. "Listen to him, waxing poetic, as if silence can buy respect. Respect is bought with control, David. Something you'll never have." Without warning, she spat. Red wine splashed across his cheek and suit, a crimson streak of humiliation. Gasps filled the room. David didn't flinch. He simply lifted his napkin and wiped the stain away with deliberate calm. His gaze met hers, steady, unreadable, and quietly dangerous. The hall fell into a suffocating silence. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim, as though the house itself recoiled. Elelena leaned back, smacking. "There," she said lightly. "Now he looks the way he lives, stained, silent, invisible." A few guests laughed nervously. David's stillness unsettled them more than anger ever could. His calm was not weakness, it was calculation. "In every family," he said evenly, "there are moments remembered for generations. This one will be yours." The words slithered across the table like smoke. Evelyn's smile faltered. She sensed something in his tone, a warning disguised as composure. "Don't try to sound wise, David," Evelyn said sharply. "You've never led this family. You never will. My daughter is the face of Whitmore Holdings. She carries the name with strength, not silence." David said nothing. Silence was both his shield and his sword. Clara Monroe, Elelena's closest friend, leaned forward, voice soft. "David, you must understand, Elelena carries burdens you can't. The company, the reputation, the legacy." Elelena smiled approvingly at Clara, but David noticed Clara's eyes linger, curious, unsettled. He remembered the night 5 years ago in this very room when Elelena had boasted that he was lucky she chose him. That without her, he'd still be teaching night classes at a second-rate university. She hadn't known that his second-rate work had quietly built a logistics model that saved Whitmore Holdings from collapse, or that her late father had rewarded him privately with controlling shares. "See." Elelena spread her arms, smacking. He can't even defend himself. A young cousin muttered, too loudly, then why keep him? Her smile twitched. Because even a dog makes a house look whole, she sneered. David's calm didn't waver. But the servants moved differently now, glancing at him with quiet respect. The partners whispered among themselves. Cracks were forming beneath Elena's marble facade. The dinner stumbled on with brittle laughter. Unease settled over the room like fog. To Elena, silence was submission. To David, it was preparation. She leaned toward her mother. He should be grateful I let him sit at this table. Evelyn nodded approvingly. You carried this family on your back, Elena. David should thank you every morning. Across the table, David's fork paused, only for a moment, then lowered again. Their cruelty had become routine. Clara spoke again, softly. Elena, perhaps you're being too harsh. David may not speak much, but he has presence. Presence. Elena laughed. A shadow has presence too. Shall I build an empire out of that? David's gaze brushed past Clara, steady and knowing. He remembered her laughter years ago, when he showed her his first designs for the company's future. She had dismissed him as a dreamer. She never knew her father had secretly invited David into closed meetings, where signatures were exchanged, debts erased, and ownership quietly rewritten in David's name. Now, as the dinner wound down, Evelyn raised her glass. Let's be honest, she said coolly. This family survives because strong women lead it. My daughter is one of them. David has always been a supporting character. Elena smirked. Exactly. I married him thinking he could keep up. Turns out, every empire has its dead weight. The guest shifted uncomfortably. David sat motionless, hands folded. Finally, he spoke, voice calm, almost tender. Every throne has its cracks, he said. Sometimes they are hidden, sometimes ignored, but they are always there. A ripple of unease swept the table. Evelyn tried to laugh, but her eyes betrayed her. David's words weren't riddles, they were promises. And before the night was over, every person in that glittering hall would understand that the man they thought powerless had been holding the kingdom all along. Evelyn had never known. Elena had never cared to ask. They believed their empire had survived by sheer hardware grit. The truth sat quietly across from them now, wiping Eleanor's spit from his suit. Shall we change the subject? Eleanor said finally, her smile too bright, too sharp. Mother, you've made your point. Let's not bore our guests with David's delusions. The laughter that followed was thin, forced. Yet beneath the clinking glasses and shallow chatter, unease threaded itself into the room. A seed had been planted. David's calm words carried weight, and weight had a way of cracking stone. The dining hall emptied slowly, the echoes of laughter and whispered gossip trailing into the marble corridors. Elena swept out first, crimson gown trailing behind her like a banner of victory. Evelyn followed close, whispering praises into her daughter's ear, their laughter slicing through the silence. Charles lingered just long enough to smirk at David before disappearing into the night. Soon the mansion grew still. Only the low hum of the chandeliers remained, vibrating faintly like a heartbeat. David sat alone at the far end of the massive table, his glass half full, the stain on his lapel still damp. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The insult replayed, not in Elena's laughter, but in the faces of the guests. Every widened eye, every averted glance, every nervous chuckle. Shame should have burned him, but what settled in his chest wasn't shame. It was clarity. He rose quietly, napkin in hand, and walked the long corridor toward his study. The mansion seemed colder at night, its walls heavy with portraits of hardware ancestors, all painted to look more powerful than they truly were. He paused at one portrait, Eleanor's father. The old man's stern gaze looked down, judging, perhaps warning. David tilted his head slightly, whispering under his breath. "You knew the truth, didn't you?" They never did. In his study, the world shifted. Gone was the sterile luxury Elena curated for appearances. This room was his. Dark oak shelves lined with books, ledgers, and documents. A single lamp cast a warm glow across a mahogany desk, cluttered not with trophies, but with files. David lowered himself into the leather chair, pulling open the bottom drawer. Inside lay folders bound in neat stacks, their edges worn from use. He took out a thick one marked in bold black ink. Whitmore Holdings Private. His fingers traced the contracts, share transfers, debt settlements, board approvals. Every page bore his signature, his quiet lifeline woven through the company like invisible thread. 90% quietly accumulated through years of patience and sacrifice. Elena wore the crown, but David held the throne. A memory flickered 10 years ago, sitting across from Elena's father in this very room. The old man's voice was tired, broken by looming bankruptcy. "You're the only one with sense, David," he had said, pushing a pen into his hand. "Eleanor has fire, but fire burns. You." He paused, studying him. "You build. Don't let the company fall even if she doesn't see it yet." David remembered the weight of that pen. How it shook slightly in his hand. Not from fear, but from the realization that he was about to carry an empire that would never credit him. He had signed. And that night the foundation of Whitmore Holdings shifted forever. Back in the present, David closed the folder gently, slipping it back into the drawer. He sat for a moment longer, hands folded, eyes steady on the dim lamp. Elena thought she had spat on a powerless man. Evelyn thought she had crushed him with words, but the documents said otherwise. And when the time was right, those papers would not just speak. They would roar. The following morning, the Whitmore mansion was awake before the sun. Servants hurried through the marble corridors, polishing silver, arranging flowers, preparing for the luncheon Elena had scheduled with her mother's circle of friends. She believed appearances must be maintained, especially after last night's spectacle. David descended the grand staircase in a crisp grey suit, quiet as ever. He moved without the need for an entourage, yet the staff paused when he passed. One maid bowed her head slightly, whispering to another. "He always notices when we're tired. Did you see how he tipped Marcus last week?" Another nodded, lowering her eyes. "He sees everything, more than she ever does." David overheard, but gave no sign. He didn't need their loyalty spoken aloud. Their difference was already his. In the breakfast room, Elena sat at the head of the smaller dining table, sipping coffee with deliberate elegance. Evelyn perched nearby, her pearls gleaming under the morning light. Clara Monroe, ever present, leaned on the armrest of Elena's chair, whispering something that made them laugh. "Good morning," David said softly as he entered. Elena didn't look up. "You're early. Strange considering you had nothing to recover from last night." Her words were smooth, but her smirk was sharp. David poured himself coffee, steady and unbothered. "Recovery is for those who fall." Clara's eyes flicked to him, intrigued, though she quickly masked it. Evelyn scoffed. "A clever line won't hide weakness, David. Everyone saw what happened. Do you think the partners will forget the way you sat there, stern and silent?" David stirred his coffee slowly, his reflection dark and calm in the porcelain cup. "Partners remember more than you think," he murmured. A memory tugged at him. Just last month, at a closed Dora meeting Eleanor hadn't attended, one of the senior partners had pulled him aside. "Mr. Whitmore," the man had whispered, glancing around nervously. "We know the truth. Your hand steadied this company when it was collapsing. If you ever decide to lead openly, many of us would stand with you." That memory lingered now as he took a sip, his eyes locking with Eleanor's. She tilted her head, suddenly uncomfortable with the quiet confidence in his gaze. To break the silence, Clara chimed in, her voice light. David, do you ever wish you had a more active role in the company? I mean, Elelena is, she hesitated under Elelena's glare. Remarkable. But surely you've thought about it. David's lips curved faintly, almost a smile. Every chess piece has its place, Clara. Even the one everyone underestimates. Eleanor laughed brittle and loud. Listen to him comparing himself to pawns. At least he knows his worth. But Evelyn frowned. Something in his tone gnawed at her. She had built her life on reading people, and David's patience no longer felt like weakness. It felt like warning. The luncheon preparations began. The clatter of silver trays filling the silence. Yet, as Eleanor returned to her chatter, Clara's gaze lingered on David. For the first time, she wondered if the man they mocked might not be the pawn, but the quiet king. The luncheon at the Whitmore estate began under the glitter of chandeliers and the hum of string instruments. Elelena glided through the room like a queen, her crimson gown demanding attention, her laughter filling every corner. Evelyn shadowed her, a matriarchal presence, nodding approvingly as guests fawned over Elelena's wit and poise. David stood at the edge of the room, speaking quietly with a junior executive who bowed almost too deeply before excusing himself. No one noticed the exchange. No one except Clara. The Whitmore corporate gala glittered like a crown jewel of the season. The ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel pulsed with golden light, chandeliers dripping crystal reflections onto polished marble floors. The city's elite had gathered, politicians, investors, socialites, all eager to bask in the glow of the Whitmore name. Eleanor stood at the center of it all, radiant in emerald silk, a living symbol of wealth and control. Cameras followed her every move, capturing the tilt of her chin, the effortless grace of her smile. She thrived under the attention, feeding on it like oxygen. David arrived late. Always late. But when he entered, the air seemed to still. His grey suit was immaculate, tailored in quiet power, no flash or arrogance, yet heads turned anyway. There was something magnetic about the calm in his stride, the certainty in his posture. Even Eleanor noticed, though she hid it behind a sip of champagne. David, she greeted when he finally approached, her tone sugar-dipped and sharp. I was beginning to think you'd lost your invitation. He smiled faintly. I had to lose something that was written by my own hand. The remark passed like a whisper, light enough for only her to hear, but it cut deep. Before she could reply, Evelyn swept in, linking arms with her daughter, forcing a laugh. Oh, there you are, David. Don't stand in corners tonight. Smile. This is family celebration. He inclined his head politely. Of course. Family. The speeches began an hour later. Eleanor took the stage first, her voice smooth and confident as she spoke about legacy, expansion, and the Whitmore vision for the next decade. Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. Investors nodded in approval. But when she called David to join her, my husband, the quiet force behind our success, the room watched with renewed curiosity. David stepped up beside her, taking the microphone with unhurried grace. His eyes scanned the audience, then settled briefly on Eleanor. For years, he began, voice steady, I've had the privilege of watching this company rise, not from glory, but from ruin. Many here remember the early days, the sleepless nights, the risks no one saw, the debts quietly erased before they became public. Tonight, I want to thank those who stood by us during those times, and those who didn't. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd. Eleanor's smile faltered. David continued. Whitmore Holdings has always been a family empire. But empires don't survive on names alone. They survive on truth. He paused. The silence was thick enough to hear the clinking of a distant glass. Tomorrow, he said finally, the board will receive documents confirming the full transfer of holdings accumulated over the past decade, shares, investments, assets, into a transparent public trust. For the first time in its history, Whitmore will belong to its people, not its name. Gasps. Whispers. Flashbulbs. Eleanor's eyes widened, shock, confusion, fury swirling beneath the surface. David, she hissed under her breath, her perfect smile frozen in place. What are you doing? He leaned close enough that only she could hear. Finishing what your father started. And then he stepped down. Calm. Collected. Applauded. Evelyn stood rooted in place, her pearls trembling against her throat. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her champagne glass until it cracked. The night went on in a blur of speculation. Guests whispered in corners, journalists hurried to call their editors, shareholders exchanged nervous glances. Somewhere between the noise and the lights, Clara found David standing near a window, gazing at the city below. You really did it, she said softly. He didn't look at her. I just told the truth. She'll never forgive you. She doesn't have to. He turned at last, a faint, tired smile ghosting his lips. Forgiveness is for those who still believe they've won. Eleanor stormed out before midnight, Evelyn close behind, both swallowed by the chaos of their unraveling kingdom. When the ballroom finally emptied, David remained. Alone. Quiet. The chandeliers above flickered once, catching his reflection in the glass, a man who had carried an empire not for glory, but for peace. And as dawn began to break over the skyline, David Whitmore raised his glass to the light and whispered, almost to himself. Every empire ends. But not every fall is a failure. The sun rose pale over the city, washing the Whitmore mansion in a muted gold. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss, the marble steps still gleamed, the fountain still murmured, and the roses in the courtyard still bloomed under the gardener's steady care. But inside, the house had grown colder. Servants moved like ghosts, their voices hushed, their glances darting toward closed doors and drawn curtains. Eleanor had locked herself in her room since returning from the gala. Her mother's knocks had gone unanswered, her anger left to fester behind the heavy oak door. Evelyn sat in the drawing room now, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the table beside her. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief. For decades she had ruled this family from behind smiles and charity luncheons, and now one quiet man had unraveled everything. When the door to the east corridor finally opened, David stepped through, immaculate as ever. He paused at the edge of the room, the morning light outlining his calm face. Good morning, Evelyn, he said softly. She looked up, her composure cracking for the first time in years. You humiliated my daughter. You humiliated this family. David tilted his head slightly. The truth humiliates only those who built on lies. Her lips thinned, trembling with rage she was too proud to show. You think you've won. You think the world will follow you now? You've exposed yourself as a traitor to your own name. He gave a faint, sad smile. My name was never yours to define. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was an entire history, years of quiet slights, polite dinners, and buried truths. Finally, Evelyn rose, gathering what dignity she had left. You'll regret this, she whispered. She will destroy you. David met her eyes, steady and unwavering. She can try. But an empire built on arrogance falls faster than one built on stone. He left her standing there, her reflection trembling in the tea surface. Upstairs, Eleanor stared at her mirror, the same mirror where she had practiced every speech, every smile, every perfect performance. But now her reflection stared back hollow-eyed, her once commanding poise fractured into disbelief. The tabloids had already begun, headlines flashing her downfall across every news feed. Whitmore power shift, husband exposes hidden ownership. Silent partner, real empire, David Whitmore's decade of control. Eleanor Hartwell Whitmore, a queen without a crown. She slammed her fist into the vanity, shards of glass skittering across the floor. The sound of breaking felt good, it was something she could control. By afternoon, Clara arrived, cautious but loyal enough to appear. Eleanor's eyes were bloodshot, but her voice was steady, eyes wrapped around fury. "They think this is over," Eleanor said, pacing. "They think a few documents can end me." Clara hesitated. David's move was decisive. "The board. The board is weak," Eleanor snapped. "They follow whoever looks strongest." "Fine. Let him enjoy his little triumph. But he's forgotten one thing." Clara frowned. "And what's that?" Eleanor turned toward the window, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Power isn't only written in contracts. It's written in perception. And I know how to control that better than anyone." She turned back, eyes alight again, not with grace, but with vengeance. "If David wants to play truth, I remind the world of his lies." Clara swallowed, sensing the danger in the air. That night, as rain whispered against the tall windows, Eleanor began making calls. Journalists, board members, old allies, even a few enemies, every number that once feared her now answered out of curiosity. Her words were smooth, measured, dripping with manipulation. By dawn, whispers had begun circulating through the financial world, claims that David had falsified filings, that his quiet ownership was the result of coercion, that he had taken advantage of Harold Hartwell in his final years. David saw the first headline before breakfast. "Silent king or corporate usurper." He set the paper down, sighing softly. He had expected this. Anticipated it. But what he hadn't expected was the call that came next. "Mr. Whitmore," said a familiar voice. It was Jonathan Reeve, the oldest board member, and Harold's most trusted friend. "We need to meet. Now." "Is this about the smear campaign?" David asked calmly. Reeve's tone darkened. "No. It's about the clause in Harold's final will. The one that names you, and Eleanor." David froze. "What clause?" Reeve hesitated. "The one that was sealed. Until now." David's fingers tightened slightly around the receiver. The faint hum of the line seemed to echo in his ear. "I wasn't aware there was a sealed clause," he said evenly. "That's because Harold didn't trust anyone with it, not even the lawyers," Jonathan Reeve replied. "He wrote it himself. The envelope was delivered to my office this morning. Postmarked for release 5 years after his death." "That was yesterday." David exhaled quietly. "I'll come to you within the hour." He hung up, staring at the empty space before him. The house was silent except for the low patter of rain against the glass. For a moment, he allowed the weariness to surface, the kind that came not from defeat, but from years of carrying truths no one else wanted to hold. Then, with a slow breath, he rose, straightened his suit, and left. Jonathan's office overlooked the city skyline, grey towers piercing through the mist. The man himself was older now, his once steady frame bent slightly, his eyes dulled by time but not by cunning. When David entered, Reeve didn't stand. He simply gestured to the sealed envelope on the table. Harold's handwriting, unmistakable, deliberate, precise. "I didn't open it," Reeve said. "You should." David nodded, taking a seat. His hand hovered for a moment over the envelope before tearing it open. Inside lay a single sheet, folded twice. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and ink, Harold study. He unfolded it slowly. "To David Whitmore and my daughter, Eleanor Hartwell. If you are reading this, I am long gone, and the empire I built, or tried to, rests in your hands. You are both my legacy, though neither of you have ever believed it. David, you are the mind that saved what my pride almost destroyed. Eleanor, you are the fire that keeps it alive. But one without the other will ruin everything. So here is my final demand. Upon the 10th anniversary of my death, the controlling shares of Whitmore Holdings will merge under a joint clause. No action taken by either of you, sale, transfer, dissolution, can proceed without the other's signature. Only by working together can you move this empire forward. If you fail to cooperate, the holdings default to a trust held by the foundation, beyond both your reach. Consider it my last lesson. Power, alone, is never legacy. Harold A. Hartwell. David read the words twice, the ink steady but the meaning heavier each time. He set the paper down, eyes distant. Reeves spoke quietly. He foresaw this. The war between you two. He left you both the crown, but chained it to each other. David's jaw tightened. She'll never agree to this. She won't have a choice, Reeves said. Once the clause is entered into the corporate registry, it's binding. David leaned back, the weight of the truth pressing against him. He had won, but not alone. Now, if Eleanor refused to cooperate, everything would crumble, including the empire he had spent a decade quietly building. At that same hour, across the city, Eleanor stood on her balcony, the skyline gleaming through a veil of morning fog. Her phone buzzed with messages, gossip, panic, warnings, but she ignored them all until Clara rushed in, breathless. They found something in your father's will, Clara said. Reeves' office released a statement. There's a clause about joint control. Eleanor turned sharply, disbelief flickering across her face. Joint control. With him. Clara nodded. It's confirmed. You and David share the empire now. Nothing moves without both signatures. Eleanor stared out over the city, her breath fogging the glass. So that's his game, she murmured. Even from the grave, father wants to teach lessons. Clara hesitated. What will you do? Eleanor turned, her lips curling into a cold smile. Play along. For now. If the only way to break the chain is to hold it together, then I'll pull until it snaps. That evening, David returned home to find her waiting in his study. She was dressed in black, her hair perfectly arranged, her expression unreadable. You've seen it, she said. I have. So we're bound together again. Husband and wife, co-leaders of an empire that no longer trusts either of us. David met her gaze, calm but unyielding. Your father was wiser than you ever gave him credit for. Eleanor laughed softly, not with amusement, but with something brittle and sharp. He was a manipulator, just like you. She stepped closer. But understand this, David. I will never be your partner. This is survival, not alliance. David regarded her for a long moment, then nodded once. Then let's survive, until one of us learns to win without destroying everything left. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The rain outside deepened, drumming against the windows like applause from ghosts. And in that fragile quiet, the future of Whitmore Holdings, and the fractured family that bore its name, hung balanced on the edge of an uneasy truce. The uneasy partnership between David and Eleanor lasted exactly 3 days before the cracks began to show. On the surface, the Whitmore estate buzzed again, meetings resumed, the staff whispered about reconciliation, newspapers printed photographs of the couple attending board sessions side by side. The illusion of unity was almost convincing. Almost. Behind closed doors, the air was colder than ever. Whitmore East Division is overextended, David said during one of their first joint reviews. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind him. We cut expansion or we lose liquidity. Eleanor flipped through the file, her tone clipped. Expansion is what keeps our investors' confidence. If we stop now, the market will smell fear. The market already smells desperation, he said quietly. Your pride won't change the numbers. Her eyes snapped up. And your caution will smother growth. We are not building a monastery, David. We are building an empire. He turned, his voice steady. Empires fall when their rulers stop listening to the truth. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Across the table, Clara Monroe scribbled notes, pretending not to hear the fracture widening in real time. By the end of the meeting, Eleanor rose first. "If I must sign your plan, I will. But don't mistake agreement for surrender." "You've never surrendered in your life," David murmured. "That's the problem." Outside the boardroom, Clara caught up to David. "She's not going to hold back, you know," she said softly. "She's already talking to outside financiers. She'll find a way around the clause." David gave a faint nod. "Let her try. The more she fights, the more she'll reveal." "Reveal what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the elevator, the door sliding shut between them. 2 weeks later, Eleanor hosted a charity gala, her first public appearance since the clause was made public. The ballroom shimmered again, all glass and gold, but this time the smiles were tighter, the laughter forced. She moved through the crowd like a queen clinging to her crown, her charm weaponized, her words perfectly calculated. Midway through the evening, she spotted David standing near a group of journalists. They were laughing with him, not at him. The sight burned. When the string quartet paused, she approached. "Enjoying yourself?" David's smile was polite. "Trying to. You've done a remarkable job." "You always do." "Don't patronize me," she said under her breath. "I wasn't. I was admiring how well you hide exhaustion." She froze. "What did you say?" He met her eyes, calm and unflinching. "You're tired, Eleanor. Fighting shadows. Fighting me. You think every moment is a battle, but all I ever did was build something worth saving." Her voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a blade. "You built it to take it from me." "No," he said softly. "I built it because someone had to." Their standoff drew the faintest attention from the nearby guests, a few glances, a murmur or two. Then David stepped back, nodded politely, and left the ballroom. Eleanor watched him go, her breath uneven. For the first time, she couldn't tell whether she was furious or frightened. That night, long after the last guest had left, she walked alone through the mansion. The corridors felt endless, the portraits watching with silent judgment. In her father's study, she stopped, the faint smell of old books and ink still lingering in the air. She found the old safe behind the painting, the same one Harold had kept for years. Her fingers trembled as she turned the dial, the sound of each click echoing in the dark. Inside, beneath papers and faded ledgers, lay a small locked box. The label read simply, "For Eleanor, when she is ready." She hesitated, then lifted it out. Whatever was inside might change everything, or destroy what little was left.